Hi, I'm Angela, and today I'm going to show you how to cut and break glass. And I will show you the tools that you need. I'm going to tell you how to practice on clear glass, how to make score lines, and different ways of breaking glass. The first thing that you need are a cutting surface. Some people will cut on a workbench that happens to be wood. That's good. We use a piece of kind of cardstock or cardboard, something that's a little soft that will cushion your cutter if it happens to hit the table. You can also use a towel for cutting glass. Some people will do that. Of course, you need your cutters, whichever cutters you use. It's up to you. I generally like to use 2 pairs of these combination pliers. They're either called combination pliers or they're called breaker grozers. They have a breaking jaw and a grinding jaw. And some will have 2 jaws that look like this. Those are just called breaking pliers. But we happen to use these. 2 pair work really well. Most of the time you only need 1. And lastly, you've got a pair of runners or running pliers. These are a little bit different. We don't always use them for stained glass, but they're good to have around. They have a little adjustable screw, and they have a certain shape for the jaws, and we'll talk about the function of that later. It's good to have safety glasses when you cut because glass flies. And lastly, Band-Aids. There are 2 basic kinds of clear glass that you can choose. And if you go to some place where window glass is sold and you happen to get some scrap, you can get either single strength or double strength. And single strength is really a lot, well, it's not all that much thinner, but it breaks a lot easier than double strength. Double strength is more the thickness of regular stained glass. And so I'll show you. We have stained glass, and it's got, around 1/8 of an inch thickness, but it's going to vary depending on the type of glass, the brand of glass. Everything is going to be very slight in differences. When you're holding your glass cutter, you always want to start with the grip that's most comfortable. And it's going to take a little bit of getting used to, but try and hold it like you would hold a pencil, because this is going to give you a lot more precision when you're trying to cut pattern pieces. So now, how glass breaks. We're just putting a score line across it, and it just goes like this, just across your glass like that. You'll get that scratch line, and it actually makes a little indent on your line, like on your glass like this. And you can go in a little wavy line, but you always want to go from one edge to another. That's the whole idea. And so you can do this as much as you want, wavy or straight. Okay? So that is a score line. And now when we go to try and break glass, we are actually going to be breaking it with our hands first. And so you're going to put your fists together with your thumbs on top and on either side of the score line. Don't be grabbing it way over here. You don't need to do that. You can grab it on the side that you started your score line and break it back past the horizontal. Any of these are going to work, and they break just like this. So I'm just scooting it over. I'm putting my knuckles right in between here, and I'm bending back. I'm going to use this pistol grip cutter, but I'm going to scoot this all out of the way, and I am going to make some cuts like this. Okay? And so now I'm breaking this by hand, and that is, remember, one hand on either side, knuckles underneath, thumbs on top, and you can bend it backward. Now, when you get to working with stained glass, there are chemicals involved, and it's going to make the glass a little bit more dense, and every glass might break a little bit differently, and it just takes a little bit more resistance and a little bit more practice to start breaking these pieces of glass. when you've got lots of different kinds of glass, sometimes different brands of glass are going to have different kinds of textures. Some glasses are going to be very smooth on both sides, but some will have a texture on both sides. Some brands, such as Spectrum, will mostly have smooth glass on both sides. And so all it matters is which side you want to face out. This particular glass here is a textured cathedral, double-rolled cathedral, made by Wismach. And there's a smoother side. It's still got a little bit of a texture, but it's much smoother than this side. This is the double-rolled side. And it's got a texture on it, but you always are going to be cutting on the smoother side. When you are cutting glass, if you make a score line and you stop and you don't go from one edge of the glass to another and you go to break it, it will find an edge to break to. So your glass cutter is telling the glass where to break. That's the idea behind glass cutting. So you always want to tell the glass exactly where to break. So go from one edge to another. It can always be just any of these edges. That's the main thing. One type of cut that we cannot do are right angle cuts. And I'll show you this here. So I'm making this big zigzag. Any of these kind of cuts that have points on them. Now, if I try to do that, look what happens. Where's it breaking? It's breaking at every single point. Now, this comes, if you look, you get the picture, right? So, different ways of breaking glass. We've got this score line, and we're going to break it with our hands. And we break it by holding it, remember, at the very back where you started. Or sometimes you don't have enough leverage in your hands to break. So this is when you can use the breaker grozers, the combination pliers. So the way you go about using this is you always put the flat side on top. The flat side is the breaking side. The bottom edge has a curved edge to it, and that's called a grozer. And you can scrape it along like this. You can also do two pairs of pliers, where you have a pair of pliers here and a pair of pliers right across from it. You could do it also right here or here. But remember, your flat sides are on top. Always do the flat sides on top, right outside from one another, and then bend backward. But that happens. And this is part of the reason why stained glass can be frustrating, because glass doesn't always break where you want it to. And so the third way is called tapping. And normally on a glass cutter, if you've ever seen the old style glass cutters, they have a tapping ball. But we usually use this nut end here. If you have one of these pistol grip cutters, you can use the ball end here. And that's what we use to tap. And to tap, you hold the glass cutter sort of like this, and you would do it sort of like a drummer would hold a drumstick. And you tap. And as you tap, you can hear the glass change pitch. You can see a crack start to form underneath the glass. That's called a fissure. And that can help assist with using the pliers. You can start tapping your glass first, and then you can use your pliers, one side on one side here, grip it on one side, grip here, and then when you break it, it will come out in the piece that you want. Say you're cutting a deep curve. It's good to have this much glass around you, and a lot of glass when you're cutting a deep curve like this. Tapping helps because you don't really want to break that out. When you're first starting, you can try breaking it out with a pair of pliers, but a lot of times this will yield results that you don't, your glass may break in places that you don't want. So what I tell people to do is to first make a score line like this, and then start tapping it. A lot of times, if you keep tapping it, what you're doing is you're just rattling the surface and you're upsetting this part of the glass. So you can start to see the crack happening right underneath. And if you keep tapping, it will fall out. It should fall out. At this point, you could also switch to the pliers and break it out that way. And a lot of times it will come out, you know, in different shards. Now, when you're cutting, you can go straight across, you can push forward, or you can go back toward you. It's up to you. You can always, it's just a matter of preference. You can go backwards or forwards, whichever. I prefer to push away from me. As you're cutting your glass, you'll want to scrape away little bits using the edge of a piece of glass. Don't use your hand, because your hand is going to get splinters, and splinters are something that happen quite often. You do not need to tap every single cut. Every person's going to be different, and some people prefer to tap every single cut. But if you're working with a piece like this, a small piece, tapping isn't going to work as well. Pliers work really well on smaller pieces. Tapping works well when you have a larger piece of glass, because when you're vibrating the glass by tapping, that is creating more of a crack. Now I've got students that, and they'll start cutting, and then they will start tapping like this. And that's okay, that's not bad. But at some point you may find that the glass is not breaking the way you want it to. Running pliers have a little frowny face, I like to call it. And that mimics your whole bending backward when you're breaking the glass. But here is the important part. It's a little slit, a little notch that's right here. This is telling you that this is the top part of the pliers. And there's a set screw here that adjusts the distance between. So if you are using thicker glass, you can judge for yourself how close together or how far apart you want them. But we usually have them about like this. So smaller than the width of the glass when you close down. But that is generally about right. If you don't open them up just a little bit, when you go to press down on them, sometimes they can crush your glass. So what you do is you line it up with a score line. I'll show you on a regular piece of glass how you would use running pliers. And you want to keep it close to your cutting board. Don't be holding it up too much. Just squeeze, and then that will give you your piece coming off of there. As far as using them for making stained glass, they're not really good in terms of breaking glass. For most purposes, these are definitely the kind that you want. Now I will tell you, they do make breaking pliers with with jaws that are both like this, and that's okay. But I like having both. I like having combination pliers because I like to have a flat jaw and I like to have a curved jaw. I only recommend this for larger pieces. And it is like this. You can either hold on to the piece of glass and you can tap it right behind it. That's what I usually do if I've got larger pieces of glass and I'm trying to get a piece of glass, just a certain amount of it, off of a great piece. Or you can do this. Scoot it off the edge of the table like this, hold on to one edge, lift up, and bring it down. But I would not recommend you doing this where you bend it across. I would slam it, and that way that will work. Or tapping.